My name is David Godman. I mostly live in South India, near the ashram of Ramana Maharshi. I discovered Ramana and his ideas when I was at college in 1974. I went out to India on a visit to just find out for myself what was going on there. That was 1976. I liked it so much, I fell in love with the place, and more or less I stayed, and that was 44 years ago. I didn't have a lot of background in that before. It was just one specific text that happened to fall into my hands in the local bookstore, which triggered my interest. I came from a background of Protestant, Methodist Christians. It never really impinged on me much. I think I discarded all that long before I went to university. It was at university that I discovered Ramana, who he was, what he'd done, everything he stood for, and something instantly clicked. And when I had a chance to go there, I did. I went there and I stayed. I think there are two possible things. You feel you are suffering and want to end your suffering, but I think there's another strand. I think for a lot of people, including myself, there's what I can only describe as a hunger for transcendence. That there's a recognition that there's something real that you haven't quite been able to grasp or get your hands on, and occasionally you meet someone or find an opportunity to examine the possibilities more clearly and to go into them for yourself and find out what's true, what's real, and what's incidental and accidental, and discard the accidental. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born in the late 19th century in South India, had a very normal upbringing. And then at the age of 16, he had a spontaneous waking up. He had a fear of death, a very intense fear of death, and he was absolutely convinced he was about to die. But instead of panicking, he watched the process inside himself and conducted a kind of internal inquiry as to what was going to die and what would survive. If this death came, to whom would the death come, to what would it come, and what would survive that particular death? So, along with that fear, he spontaneously asked himself a question: who is the one who sees? Who is the perceiver? Who is registering this world around me? And he said, as that inquiry took place instantly, he said this perceiving eye, this thing inside himself, which saw a world outside of himself, actually vanished. And he said the net result was that he found himself in what he called the natural state of self. This is something that has existed in Indian philosophy as a concept, but it's not just a concept, it's something that you can aspire to, it's something that you can become one with, and you get to it by discarding your own sense of individuality, your own idea that you're an individual person occupying a particular space. With him, he didn't have to do anything. He didn't have a prolonged period of practice. It just happened very quickly, very spontaneously. And from the age of 16 onwards, he said he was in that state permanently 24 hours a day. So you can say that the individual I, his sense of being a person, an individual, never functioned in him again. So he had no agenda, if you like. He didn't feel he had to go out and rush around and tell people about this great discovery. He was quite content to abide in this state, this undercurrent which he'd become one with, but people naturally got attracted to him. He left home at the age of 16. He went to a very famous religious pilgrimage center in South India and stayed there. And there was something about him that attracted people. People came to him, and somehow by hanging out with him, they got very quiet, they got very peaceful. I think there's a 19th century philosopher, I forget his name, he said, if you invent a better mousetrap, no matter how hard you try to hide yourself, even in a forest, people will beat a path to your door and find you. That there was something about him. He'd got this innate capacity to make people quiet, peaceful, and happy, not by doing anything, simply by people sitting in his presence, it happened to them. So he realized that he couldn't really run away, that wherever he was, this would happen. So he, shall we say, resigned himself to his fate and sat quietly in this major pilgrimage center in South India. And over time, thousands of people came and they just sat with him. They absorbed his silent emanations, and to whatever extent they were ready or mature enough to receive them, they too got a kind of taste or a flavor of what he himself was experiencing all the time. So when people said, "What are your teachings?" he didn't have a list of ideas or words. He said, "My teachings are the silence that comes off me when I just sit here minding my own business." So people would come, and if they were in a relatively quiet state themselves, they would experience something of that silence. He said, "If you've got a question, fine, ask it, but those aren't, I can give you an answer, but the answer are not my teachings. My true teachings are simply the silence that comes off me because I'm naturally abiding in this state all the time." In later years, he was quite willing to give replies, but he wasn't what in the Western world you would call a philosopher. Although he could do philosophy, he read philosophy books because people asked him about them and wanted explanations. He wrote very little, spoke very little. I think for the vast majority of people, the reason they went to see him was something about his proximity, something about the way he looked at them, that there was something transformative about being around him. And for the vast majority of people, that was enough. The real teaching was the silent presence, the emanations that came off him. If people were saying, "Well, I'm not getting it, how do I find out for myself what is this state that you are saying that you're in? I'm not experiencing now, even though I'm sitting here. What do I do?" So the "what do I do" question, the general response he would tell you to do something called self-inquiry. So that this is quite central to the message that most people associate with him. So if you remember, when I described what happened to him when he was 16, he said there was a spontaneous examination of the observing, perceiving I inside himself. And he said that by looking at it, by focusing on it to see what it was, in himself, it disappeared. So he was lucky, or he was ready for it. For most other people, they're not that ready, they're not that lucky. So they have to undergo some kind of process in order to eliminate this perceiving I, which takes up occupancy in your body and says, "I'm a person, I'm going to conduct my life from inside this body." He said that's the source of suffering, that's the source of everybody's problem. It's a sense of individuation, the idea that there's somebody inside the body who has a mind, who occupies the body, who has to make choices and decisions to live in a particular way. He said that just gets you entangled in all kinds of dramas. He said there's an alternative. There's a substratum, there's a state in which this idea, I am a person who occupies a body, simply doesn't function. There's no body in there who chooses or decides. There's no one who strives, no one who attains. There's simply an innate knowledge that what you are is what's true, what's real, and it's not associated or identified with anything. It just is as it is. So he would say, if you want to try for yourself to find out what this is, he said, your problem is that you have inside yourself a receiving or a perceiving I, which is constantly jumping out to latch onto or associate with objects that it thinks about, objects which it sees, feelings, emotional states. So on a moment to moment, you might be seeing something. Right now I can see plants, I can see lights. There's a subject inside me that I call David, but I also call it I. That's the subject. The object are the plants, the bags, everything I can see are the objects of my attention. He said that this idea that you're a person inside a body is fueled and sustained by all the things that this I jumps out to latch onto, to associate with. So it kind of feeds the illusion that there's somebody inside, somebody who has to collect this information, process it, and use it to make a next decision. He said that's completely wrong. The idea that you're a person inside a body only appears to exist because you're constantly looking at things and saying, I am seeing this, I am feeling this, I am experiencing this. He said if you could instead put attention on the inner feeling of I, this state of interior I-ness, so that when you say, I am hungry, I am angry, I am a man, I am a lawyer, the central core, the central thread, like the string going through a necklace, is the I, upon which everything else becomes the predicate. So he said, hold on to this sense of I, and don't let it jump out, don't let it associate with anything else, and you will find it's a myth, it's a fiction. It only appears to exist because all of these other things are grabbing hold of it and giving it a completely false sense of continuity, making you think that you're a person inside a body. So he said, hold on to this perceived inner sense of I. Every time something else tries to take your attention away from it, he just said, no, not interested today. Like the salesman at the door, just go away, not today, thank you. Go back to the perceiving I, the subject I. And he said, you'll notice that when it no longer has an impulse to reach out, to connect, to associate, then it actually starts to subside, and eventually it disappears, and it reveals that same state, that same substratum that he said he got permanently and definitively at the age of 16. That's the whole point. Whatever you think about, whatever you feel, is not you. The you is the I who experiences. I am angry, I am happy, I am, 2 meters tall. Everything that you add on to the I is a predicate that you've assumed somehow qualifies or colors in new aspects of you. But it doesn't. It's possible to have an I that's not associated, not connected with any of these predicates or attributes. And what he is saying is that by constant, vigilant awareness of the I that is making up this story, that it's someone who lives inside you, you challenge it, you look at it, you stop it making the connections, and slowly it withdraws, and finally it gets to the point it disappears, and you say, yes, that's what I am, that's what I always was. Everything else was a kind of a fiction, a layer that appeared on top of me because I didn't look at this I long enough or hard enough to discover its true nature. I think Ramana recognized that a lot of people did have busy lives. They had job commitments, they had family. He never, ever gave anyone his permission or gave out advice to the effect that they should give up any of that. He said, look after your family, do your job, but don't waste your spare time. In every moment you have that's not required for doing the various obligations that have come your way in life, he said, look at your mind, watch how it functions, and you will note that there is this essence, this I thing inside yourself. It's the conductor of your internal orchestra. It's the person waving the baton, making the music, making all your reactions. It's latching onto things, getting excited over them, becoming averse to them. He is saying all of these reactions are simply because you don't look at the nature of this thing that you call I. We all glibly say, I'm going to the bathroom, I'm going to the beach, I like this, I don't like that. And we don't look at this central thing called I, which is claiming authority, which is claiming occupancy of the body, and look at it to the point where you understand that it's just a framing mechanism. All the stuff that comes in, the thoughts, the ideas, the perceptions, they come in and they get processed in such a way that makes you think, I am this person. I live in this body. I have to choose and decide what to do next. He said, if you can untangle that, if you can put full and complete attention on the I will vanish, and all your suffering will go along with it. He said, suffering is simply a consequence of buying into this idea that you're a person inside a body. If you think you're too busy and you don't care, that's your problem. There are people, though, who think this is the most important thing in my life. I talked about a hunger for transcendence earlier on. If you've got that hunger, if you want to get out of the game, if you want to stop being affected or overwhelmed by all the things that the game produces, have a look. Isolate this thing called I inside yourself. Watch it, hold on to it, watch it go back to its source and disappear, and then you find the peace, the stillness in which suffering can't arise at all. You have to want it enough, and you have to want it more than all the other things that your mind is saying, this is more interesting, go and do that instead. You have to understand that running after all these ideas, these thoughts, these associations, not only doesn't make you any better, any happier, it actually makes you suffer. You have to get to the point of the diabetic in the cake shop window, looking in the window, salivating, thinking, wow, I'd really enjoy tasting that, but simultaneously having the knowledge that if he goes in and eats a cake, he'll go into a diabetic coma. You have to frame your constant desire to indulge against the consequences of doing it and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go that route. I want that mental diabetic coma not to happen. I'm not going to go that route. So you need some discrimination. You need to say to yourself, I've lived my life for however many years. I've had all the suffering. I've had enough. This man is giving me a hypothesis. I'm going to check it out and see if it works. You don't have to believe anything. There's no belief system here. He's saying, I was like this, I did this, then this happened. You try it for yourself. If it works for you, fine. If not, it doesn't bother me either. It's not some state or experience that you attain, because anything you attain is somehow time-bound. You got it in time, and over time it would disappear. What he's talking about is something that's there all the time, which has always been there, but somehow it was covered up because you invented this personality, this occupant of the body, who bought into a whole bunch of myths about living there, about being an individual who existed in a spatial universe across a period of time. All that somehow is an outgrowth, is contingent on this idea, I live inside a body. He said, if you can get rid of that through putting full attention on this sense of I inside yourself, then all the things you thought about yourself, thought about the world, he said, they all go out the window. They're all a complete myth, and they're all anchored to this sense of an I being inside a body. I started doing it when I was at college in the 1970s. I got my instruction manual, if you like, from probably the only book available in the West at that time. I did it. It made me extraordinarily quiet, peaceful, happy. When you're testing a hypothesis, you want some results. So I started doing it, and what it said on the can was what I found inside. It did make me very peaceful. It did make me very happy, so I continued with it. So Ramana had a division, if you like, between different kinds of practice. He said, if you're putting your attention on an object, then you are reinforcing the idea that there's a subject inside the body who can associate with or identify with an object. So if you're looking at an image, if you're saying some words, if you're watching your breath, you are the subject. Watching the breath becomes the object of your attention. So he called that meditation. He said meditation is about witnessing or observing objects. He said, that's not what I'm saying at all. He said, if you keep putting attention on objects, then your sense of being an I is not going to diminish. It will continue to be just as strong because you're reinforcing it by focusing on an object. What I'm saying is this thing called inquiry withdraws attention from all objects, whether they're practices such as watching the breath, repeating mantras. He said, these are all object-based practices. He said, what I'm teaching you is a subject-based practice, that you keep full attention on your inner sense of I am, of being, of existing. And he said that severs the habit of this individual I from jumping out and connecting with objects, because as soon as it does that, then you just continue to believe that you're a person, and each time you make a new association, that confirms your wrong notion that there's somebody inside the body who looks outside the body and needs to do something or choose something or decide something. There's no hierarchy. There's a single substance or essence which he called self, simply because that's what you are, and that's why he used the word self. In traditional Eastern Hinduism, it's called Brahman, Atman. He liked to use the word self, I think, to emphasize the fact it wasn't something that you went looking for that was different from you. It